Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So again, wherever you choose to join us from, whether it's California, Michigan, on your couch, in the kitchen, wherever you join us and listen, we just want to say welcome. Thank you for journeying with us. Here at Ethos, we take the Bible responsibly. We ask questions of who's the audience, right? Who wrote it? What tribe was present during that era? Where were they? We look at the original language. We spend hours and hours preparing this. And so we just want to thank you for being a part of this journey. And so without further ado, we have been delving into the book of Genesis. And I've had a couple of you reach out and say, man, this is taking a while. We're like halfway through. Well, yeah. Many rabbis, here, this might surprise you. Many rabbis, when they read through Genesis, they will take years to approach this piece. And so we've been moving through a couple months, right? But for them, it's years and years of deep, deep study. And they go word by word, line by line. And that's exactly what we've been doing. We've been looking at everything that we think is beautiful, but can yet be used for today, relevant, right? And so Genesis, again, we remind our audience every time, this is not a history book, right? This is not a history book. If this is the first time you've joined us, Genesis was not written so that we could look back and see perfect dates, times, exact family names and all these things. That was never the case. They were writing because they were in Babylonian captivity. 587 BC is where really we see the start of the journey. They were taken captive by the Babylons, marched hundreds of miles on foot until they get to the city, and where again, all other tribes who have also been conquered are there. And so the question, of course, is, will Israel, like all the other tribes, will they assimilate? Will Babylon's gods become their gods now? Will Babylon's traditions, values, will those things be the things that they take on? And so for Israel, they said, no, we are not going to take on the traits of Babylon. We will hold fast to what it means to be a Hebrew. And so Torah is a written response to the fears of assimilation. That's the deeper picture, not a history book. Not to say that some events didn't happen, but we understand stories told over the campfires kept bigger and bigger and bigger. Right? Where once there was a fish becomes a whale, was swallowed by a whale, all these concepts, they get bigger and bigger. Right? And so we understand Jonah, if he were to literally be swallowed by a whale, the stomach acid alone would kill him within a minute, minutes of time. Did Jonah literally die when he gets down to the bottom and then literally be resurrected to life when he comes back up? Well, we have scientific questions of that if we're looking at it from a 21st century perspective. But back then, we understand the campfire stories were told so that they could see themselves in the story. Israel's resurrected again, over and over again, from captivity back into life, freedom, life more abundantly. That's a bigger picture. And so Israel, when they would pull out Torah, these ancient scrolls, there would be rejoicing, celebration, right? Because Torah for them, again, is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized through every one of its tellings. So again, Moses, Abraham, Elijah, Elisha, so many different characters. They all had connection. They saw themselves in the story, right? And so that's how we, as 21st century readers, viewers, when we understand it from that perspective, it actually makes a lot more sense. We don't have to try to make certain things scientifically fit anymore. We can appreciate the text for what it is. Israel finds itself over and over again in the story. They are putting their values, their traditions, their understanding of the divine, the world, culture, they're putting it all into these stories. And that's where the beauty is. That's where the life is. So today, Genesis 24, we're going to delve in again. We're going to finish off this chapter. So last week, what we did is we looked at Genesis 1 through verses 10, right? And it took us a good amount of time. But if you remember what happened, basically Abraham sends his servant and his servant to back where Abraham starts his journey. And there his servant is going to find Isaac's, who remember Isaac, Abraham's son, Isaac's wife from the tribe Abraham used to be a part of. And so very specifically, he's going to look for certain things. And basically, if he gets there and this woman comes out, one of the daughters, she gives his camels water as well as him, there's a sure sign that she's the one. And so sure enough, he meets her and she says, I'm going to take you to my parents. And so that's where we ended off. And so Genesis 24, 11 through 49 is actually the recap of the servant going to the household, and he retells the story, right? And so for me, I've read this 11 through 49 over and over again. And the truth is, there's not a lot of new nuances and ideas. Rabbinically, they haven't written extra concepts on this because the story was told already. So if you would like to read 11 through 49, go ahead. But basically what happens in that section is the servant simply retells the story, retells the miracle it took, right, for him to be there and see Rebekah for the first time, her sharing the water, all of it. He retells the story to the parents so they might also appreciate the miracle. So let's step in to chapter 24, but we're going to start with verse 50 today, and we're going to move through into 60. So here we go. Laban and Bethuel answered. These are the parents of Rebekah. This is from the Lord, right? This is their response to the servant's retelling of the story. This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. When Abraham's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. And then he and the men who were with them ate and drank and spent the night there. It continues. When they got up the next morning, he said, send me on my way to my master. But her brother and her mother replied, let the young woman remain with us a year or 10 months, then you may go. I want you to notice something here before I even step in further. 55 is often translated 10 days. The actual Hebrew is actually 1 year or 10 months. So it's kind of important to know it is a mistranslation when you read the NIV, the King James Version. This is actually the original Hebrew concept. It's a year or 10 months. Verse 56. But he said to them, do not detain me now that the Lord has granted success to my journey. Send me on my way so that I may go to my master. Then they said to him, let's call the young woman and ask her about it. So they called Rebekah and asked her, will you go with this man? I will go, she said. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the cities of their enemies. Then Rebekah and her attendants got ready and mounted the camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac had come to Beer Lahai-roi, for he was living in Negev. And he went out to the field one evening to meditate. And as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, who is that man in the field coming to meet me? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself, as brides would have done in that era. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. And she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So, really important before delving into this. There's an interesting Jewish tradition of the wedding that I think is really important to understand. As you understand this ritual, the wedding traditions for them as Jewish people, I think you're going to begin making some interesting connections. Just me sharing how Jewish people perform weddings. So let me share with you a little bit. And of course, we're going to delve into something a little bit later on that I think most of you will connect. But let me share with you now the Jewish tradition of marriage. So first off, when a man sees this woman, usually they're younger ages, they see that person. They begin kind of a courtship of talking, sometimes not. But basically the families are aware that these two, there's something special there, right? They know that these two could potentially be a good match. And so at some point, the son is going to go to the father of his potential bride, right? And he's going to go there, and he has been saving up his money. He's been saving up his money since he was young. And so what he'll do is he will bring a dowry. Now, most of the time, dowries in ancient cultures would be the wife's parents giving it to the husband. But this is different in Jewish culture, and I find this really fascinating. They felt the bride was worthy of the gift, right? There was some exchange, of course, between the husband and wife of the bride. There was a gift, but it's not quite the element of courtship we're looking at here. There would be a gift that he would give the bride's family. He would give the bride's family. And if the family agreed and they felt this was a worthy connection, right, they would say, okay, you may marry our daughter. And so, of course, the date is going to be set. Next, what is going to happen is finally they're going to have their wedding day, right? They're going to have their wedding day, and beautiful things will happen. They'll have the tent. They will consummate all of these different things. But here's the thing. Here's what most people don't know about Jewish culture during that era, is that the husband then will leave the bride. She will go back to her father's house. And the husband will go back to his father's house. And what he'll do while he's there is he will build an addition onto the home, because these families live together kind of communally. And so they'd build their houses, right? In these ancient cultures, they'd build their houses on and these rooms on and make them bigger. And so what would happen is the husband, the groom, he would be building this beautiful place, this holy space for he and his wife and their family someday. So he would be building this. And at some point in time, the wife knows, my husband's coming back. He's going to come to bring me back to his father's home. Yeah, some of you're like, wait a second, I know where you're going. We'll get there, I promise. But that's the beauty of the tradition. She's waiting for him. And at some point in time, he'll show up and he will bring her to the house that he's prepared for her. That special space, right? That's also connected to his father's home, which someday he will inherit the whole thing, right? He becomes the head of the home. It's a really beautiful tradition. So knowing this whole thing is going to pop. I promise. It's going to hum. So notice this, verse 50. We can say nothing to you one way or another. I find this really interesting from the get-go, right? After we understand the wedding, all of that's going to make sense later. But isn't this beautiful? We can say nothing to you one way or another. Knowing this, right? The servant has acted on not just the master's account again, but also the groom's. And so this is a really kind of cool moment here. We're going to trust. We're going to trust that the thing you've said, right, is going to happen. We're going to put some trust in this. He's essentially told the bride, the parents' groom, he's already begun preparing the home, or he's preparing the place. If she says yes, she doesn't have to wait. That's kind of an interesting idea here that would have broken tradition a little bit. Notice the response. This is from the Lord. We trust that it's good. We trust that things are going well. This miraculous thing that happened, we believe it's going to be good. Trust, right? This is difficult for many of us because let's think about this. They just met this man, right? They just met this man. How do they already trust him, right? If we're taking this story very literally, how do they already trust the man? Think about the times in your life for just a minute. Think about the times in your life when things kind of fell into place for you. Or you've been hoping, praying about certain things, and all of a sudden, things start falling just at the right time, just at the right place. I know this has happened to you. It's happened to me too. These moments, the right people, the right places, all these things begin to fit into place. And so for them, this is a reminder that sometimes the Lord opens up the doors, right? And when the Lord opens up the doors, the only real response now, you've done the hard work, you've prayed, you've studied, you've meditated. When the doors open, sometimes the only reasonable action is to trust the process and walk through the door, right? And this is what the parents do. They've heard the miraculous sign. They know, and so they step forward in faith. We might use the word faith here, trusting that the thing is true. It's been a miraculous journey already. We're going to trust that the thing is true. One of my favorite responses from Rabbi Rashi on this, he says, for Israel, the real journey was less literal, more metaphorical. They were learning to trust Yahweh with their minds first. Their feet followed into the wilderness, desert, and eventually the promised land. For Israel, what it meant to be Israelites was that you had to learn a certain element of trust because things were always chaotic for them, or at least it often felt chaotic. But in the chaos, in the movement, in the liminal space, in the questions, in the persecution, with all of it, there is an element we trust that we're going to make it through. We trust. It's so beautiful. And these foreigners, these Gentiles, you might call them, these non-Jews, they understand that. And as a Jewish person who's reading this, they would be surprised by this. These foreigners trust also that our God is good. If they can trust, how much more can we trust? You see the beauty of this story already, right? And so it continues. When Abraham's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry, articles of clothing, gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night. So again, notice the tradition, the giving of the gifts, right? Again, a foreigner would have been very surprised by this, right? Aren't we supposed to be giving you gifts? But no, the son brings gifts to the family. It would have shocked them. And so, of course, in these moments, I love this idea here. There's a celebration, right? In these moments when we step out, when we trust, when we see the miraculous and we walk through the door, it's worth celebrating, isn't it? It's worth taking time to celebrate, to say, man, I did the thing, right? It was scary. It was terrifying. I'm trusting that it's going to work out. In those moments, what if you took time to just enjoy that this is a process? My wife and I, we were in the middle of a lot of questions at one point. Not that long, a couple of years ago. We weren't sure what the next thing was. And so we started really praying, questioning, having discussions about what is the next thing. And before we knew it, certain things just opened up. And we knew in that moment, we need to step forward, right? We need to step forward in faith, understanding the process is good. Right? There is something waiting on the other side of this. And so I remember going to this concert. Well, I've always seen the divine speaks to me at these great musical events. I always get something beautiful. The artists will say something. The music will speak to me. The community of people gathered together listening to music, it just does something to me. Maybe I'm just more opened up to it. I don't know. But at this concert, we kept getting all this confirmation, all these words of wisdom that this stepping out at that moment was the right thing to do. And so we went and we celebrated it, right? We danced, we sang to one of our favorite bands in the middle of all of this. And I remember learning in that moment, sometimes it's worth taking the time to be able to say, I stepped out. And just that action of stepping out was so brave, and it was worth celebrating together. So we took time to celebrate, much like this family does with the servant. It's a beautiful moment. It's really pivotal. They step out, they celebrate it. Notice this, verse 55. But her brother and her mother replied, let the young woman remain with us, maybe a year, 10 months, then you may go. This is an interesting shift, right? There's this moment of trust. Yes, we're so excited, the miracle. And then all of a sudden they're going back on their word, right? Did they change their mind? Like, why the hesitation all of a sudden, right? Why did they lose faith? The answer, again, it goes back to that bridal tradition, right? It's so important to understanding this. The bridal tradition. The idea here again is that the man, he takes time. He's there building the home, right? And so for a Jewish reader who's actually writing the story, right? They would have understood you can't just take her back right there and have everything ready, right? That's going to take time. right? It's gonna take a year, 10 months. That was the typical time, you guessed it, that it would take for the husband to prepare the place for his wife. A year, sometimes only 10 months, but it was typically during that time era. That was the time that they gave it, right? 10 months often is associated as well in Jewish literature with a time of like, you have to get through it. Right? The 10 months, the 10 days, it's a time of like, it's testing your perseverance. The 10 days, the 10 months, the 1 year. The idea here is the husband is supposed to be preparing the place, right? But notice this as I read on. He says, "Do not detain me. Now that the Lord has granted success to my journey, send me on my way so I may go to the master." Notice this. He's breaking tradition to some degree. Right? A Jewish person would have been like, hey, wait a second. Like I thought it's going to take a year, 10 months. He should be starting to prepare, right? What's going on? Something beautiful here to think about. It's beautiful. He is breaking tradition. First point, God sometimes steps out of traditional structures to make beautiful things happen. Secondly, which I think is almost more important for Israel at this moment, isn't it such a beautiful idea that even though you're in the middle of captivity, the divine has been hard at work preparing a place for you? I know, right? This is beautiful. For Israel, when they read this moment, and I can confirm this because over and over again, rabbi after rabbi, when they talk about this moment in the story, something really beautiful happens. You can almost feel the emotion. Because while we were thinking it was going to be longer than it was, the divine was already preparing our escape. The divine was already prepping the door, opening. He was getting the place ready for us. We just weren't aware of it. But it was already being prepared. We weren't even aware of it. So good. Right? Sometimes in the middle of your brokenness, in the middle of your trials, isn't it such a cool idea to think that maybe the divine is already prepping, has already been prepping ahead of time for you? It's a really cool, beautiful, compelling idea for these people in the middle of Babylonian captivity. It is so good. Yeah. It continues. So they said, call the young woman. We'll ask her, right? And I love the phrase here. She says, I will go. There's no like question. She's not, I don't know, maybe not. She says, I will go. I'll go. I'm going to trust that he's already prepared a place for me. I'll go. Israel sees themselves through the eyes of the foreigner, right? They see themselves through the bride here, Rebecca. They see themselves in the story. I will go. I'll trust that the journey's good. I'll trust that the place is going to be prepared for me. So good. Look at what one writer says. Rebecca joins Abraham, Moses, Ruth, Samuel, and others by speaking out prophetic messianic phrase, I will go. Right? Speaking out as Jewish people, our prophetic phrase, I will go. Right? Coinciding with I will trust. I'll believe, right? I will trust that the thing is true. I will go. I will step out in faith, right? It's a holy, holy phrase. Moses steps out into the desert, right? Abraham steps into new life. Ruth steps into a new future. Samuel into like this prophetic kind of place he's going to be. Daniel, the lion's den. David, the giant. It goes on, right? I will go. Right? I will stand. I'll be the one. I'll do the thing. So good. And then it continues, 61 and 62. Rebecca and her attendants got ready. They mount the camels. They get ready to go. But watch this now. I find this really kind of beautiful when they finally see each other. It's really, it's a love story. Right? It's a love story. But really, remember, it's a love story between Israel and their God. That's the story, right? That's the story we miss when we make it too literal. There's a love story there, of course, right? Isaac and Rebekah, but there's the bigger story, Israel and the divine. So remember that as I read this part. Isaac had come from Beer-lahai, for he was living in Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate. Notice he is meditating. He's preparing. He's been preparing this whole time, right? She just didn't know it. It's a cool idea about your future wife or your future husband or whatever it is. What if we can say they've been preparing for me for years? Shouldn't I be doing the same? Beautiful. Yeah. So he's meditating. He looked up. He sees the camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and she sees Isaac. Right? It's like a love story, right? They see each other. She got down from the camel. She asked the servant, "Who is that guy?" Right? Who's the guy in the field coming to meet us? Who is it? She's not seen him yet. Rebekah gets all of her tents. They go. They see it. Who is the man? It's so beautiful. Someday your groom, Israel, is going to bring you home again. Someday you're going to ask, where was the groom? Right? And the answer was, preparing for you the whole time. Preparing for you the whole time. In the middle of your captivity, your brokenness, in the middle of your run, your journey, your marathon of life, preparing for you. I almost look at it like this this picture of like you running a race, you getting there to the finish line, right? You've run the race, and as you hit that finish line, right? When you hit it, you sometimes forget all those moments you've been working so hard to get here, right? You spent months training for that marathon, maybe even like a year training. And finally, when you cross that finish line, right? You made it. It's surreal. It's a very surreal moment. I did the thing, right? I got here. The thing is happening. You forget all the things that took you to this place because you just realize, I got here, right? And for Israel, they're seeing themselves in this story. Someday we're going to get there. We're going to cross the line. We're going to move into the promised land. We're going to have freedom again. All that hard work, all that pain, it's going to be worth it someday when we finally see the groom, right? When we finally see the groom, when we finally experience the divine. And he married Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. The bride is home. Israel, someday this will be your love story too, right? And so many of you, I know you got from the get-go. You saw it, right? You understood Jesus, right? Jesus in John 14, he makes this interesting point, but before the ascension begins, there's this really beautiful moment. He turns to the disciples and he says this, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms." Now, again, many people have literalized this, right? They've taken this to mean, oh, up there somewhere, there are literal homes and mansions being made. I don't know, maybe not, but that was not the intention of this piece. This was a reference toward what we just talked about, the marriage tradition of what the Jews did, right? In my Father's house, there are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? Again, the groom is preparing a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. The groom, after the year, the 10 months, the trials, right, that they're waiting to have, the spaces there, he would typically go back and he would take his wife back home. He prepared the way, right? And so the way of Jesus is the way of Isaac, the way of Moses, the way of Samuel, Ruth, Daniel. And here's the thing, sometimes we have to trust. Right? We have to step out in faith, knowing the groom, right? Life more abundantly is going to meet us. That the thing has been building the entire time and we weren't even aware of it. The roots have taken shape, right? They've been working under the ground and we haven't seen it yet. But at some point in time, that plant is going to burst through. And when it does, we'll say, there was something happened under the surface we weren't even aware of until now. The divine has been moving the entire time. and we weren't even aware of it. And for Israel, the reminder was, hold on, right? The groom is coming back and has been preparing a place the entire time. So how do we take this home? There's so many directions we could go with this. For me, I thought simply this: how do we trust when things are going difficult for us? When we're in the middle of trials, when we're like on day 2 of the 4-month training for the marathon, right? When things are really difficult, when our feet are sore or bloody, what do we do? How do we hold on, right? How do we trust? So number 1, don't diminish your problems. Identify them. I think it's okay to be able to say, my feet hurt, right? This thing I'm going through, absolutely, it's terrible. It's so terrible, because ignoring the pain, the hurt, the problem, the difficult journey, it's not going to help us by ignoring the problem away. I think we have to recognize sometimes we need help. Recognize that this difficult journey is exactly that. It's difficult. Recognize we're in the middle of it, right? When you understand that is truly happening, you will also understand there's going to be something coming that it's going to be worth it. And so I can embrace the sore feet, the sore muscles, the exhaustion. I can learn to embrace it knowing that something bigger is on its way. Number 2, take time to pray. Meditate on what success looks like, right? Meditate on what freedom will look like. Meditate on what the good thing will be that you're going to be asking the divine for, right? To be loved, whatever the goal is, seeking it, ask yourself, what is it going to look like? Because then when you understand that, that's when number 3 takes place. You know what to ask for, right? You know what to ask for. I would argue Israel didn't know what to ask for in the middle of slavery. Often. They would oftentimes lose their identity and their focus, who they were as Israelites. And so sometimes we have to re-identify, what does it look like to be an Israelite? Right? And for us today, what does it look like to be really human, to be a Christ follower? What does that look like? To be happy, right? When's the last time you asked yourself, what would me looking happy really look like? Me looking fulfilled, what would that look like? And once you identify that, now you've got a reason to pray. Right? Now you've got a reason to meditate, to do what Israel did in the middle of their Babylonian, Egyptian, Assyrian, whatever, in the middle of their captivity. They cried out. You have a direction for where your crying out is going to go. Understand it, and then pray, cry out. And then last one, remember your past, hope for the future. Remember your past, hope for the future. You have been in similar places before. Let's be honest. You have dealt with issues, and maybe they have not been as big as this one, right? Maybe the thing you're going through is an absolute doozy. But you've overcome things in the past, right? You have proven your resilience. Why not remember some of your stories of the past like Israel did, right? They are retelling their stories because their past victories are reminders that they got through things too. And so why not have you do the same thing? Why don't you take moments to remember your journey, to remember where when you trusted the process, when you stepped out, good things came. You're still alive. You're still here with us. And so you survived that thing. So you can survive it again. The trial, the brokenness, the fear, the journey, whatever the thing you're going through, remember, you have built up resilience in the past, and maybe this thing you're going through has caused the past journeys, the past brokenness, the past trials. Maybe those things have helped you build up resilience, so now you can face this bigger thing, right? It's a beautiful idea to consider. It's what Israel was doing as they read the story. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this. This was chock full of beauty, meaning, and again, such an interesting point. When you understand the Jewish connections to the marriage traditions, all of it, it just hums. So as always, please consider going to ethos-church.org/donate. We're a tax-deductible donation. We think the time we spend on doing all of this, it's worth it, right? but it's not always easy. And so please help us continue sharing these messages. Send it to people you know. Whenever you hear something you really like, shoot that out. Put that on Facebook. I know our Facebook groups continue building. We want to keep building our YouTube channel. Please support us financially, but also share our links. Share our links. And if you want to join us in live discussions, please consider going to Ethos Living Rooms. And as always, hit that subscribe button and share those videos. Thank you, everyone. We love you and can't wait to see you next week when we delve into chapter 25. Take care.